I used to wake up to the same sound every morning, the mechanical cough of the old radiator in my apartment, spitting warm air into a room that never quite felt alive. It was a cheap unit wedged above a greasy Thai restaurant in downtown Portland, and everything in it smelled faintly of lemongrass and burnt oil. I remember lying there most mornings, staring at the yellowed ceiling, tracing the cracks like they were escape routes I was too afraid to follow. Life had been shrinking around me for years, quietly like a noose, tightening so slowly I forgot to resist. My days were a blur of monotony, a gray cubicle, a headset clamped to one ear, and the polite but dead voice I used to guide frustrated customers through software resets. I was good at pretending I cared, good at sounding calm while my insides felt like a drained battery. Every day I'd walk out of the building at 5, merge into a river of faces just as hollow as mine, and wonder if anyone else felt like they were living underwater. There was a moment, a small one, almost forgettable, that finally pushed me over the edge. I was eating lunch alone at my desk, as usual, scrolling through an article about national parks on my phone. There was a picture of a fire lookout standing above a sea of endless green, its wooden structure carved sharply against the sky. The caption said it was taken in the Cascade Range, not far from where I lived. Something stirred in me then, something I'd thought was long dead, a hunger, a wanting. Not for adventure exactly, but for air, for quiet, for a life where my hands did more than click buttons. I didn't even realize I'd applied until I got the email. U.S. Forest Service Seasonal Fire Lookout, Station 5 vacancy. Station 5. I didn't know anything about it. The listing was vague, almost aggressively so. I remember reading the words remote, extended solitude, and mandatory compliance with station-specific guidelines. At the time, I brushed it off as government boilerplate. If anything, it made the job sound more appealing. I accepted the position within an hour. It was the first real decision I'd made for myself in years, and the immediacy of it left me dizzy. I quit my job the next morning. My manager blinked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. I didn't give a 2-week notice. I didn't pack up most of my things. I left behind everything that felt heavy, simply because I could. The relief was enormous. A sudden exhale that rattled loose something in my chest. The drive out of the city felt like waking up for the first time in a long while. The buildings thinned, the traffic dissolved, and the horizon expanded into long ribbons of forest and sky. I hadn't realized how starved I'd been for color until then. For the deep greens of pine, the blue smudges of distant peaks, the copper gold light seeping through the branches as the sun began to set. Yet beneath that new lightness was a strange undercurrent, a quiet anxiety humming beneath my ribs. I told myself it was natural. Anyone would feel uneasy trading their life for one at the edge of civilization. Anyone would worry about whether they'd made a mistake. But there was something else too. A memory from the night before I left. I'd packed what little I needed, clothes, a thermos, a worn field jacket I found in a thrift store, a pocket notebook, and tried to fall asleep early. But around midnight, I dreamed something I can't fully piece together now. I remember towering trees, impossibly tall, reaching like fingers toward a sky threaded with red veins of light. I remember a whisper that wasn't a whisper, but a vibration, low, resonant, almost mechanical, moving through the earth. When I woke, my heart was racing, and the smell of pine lingered in my nose, strong enough to make me wonder if it had drifted in from outside. I lived nowhere near pine trees. I shook off the dream eventually, but a part of me carried it silently into the mountains. The road narrowed as I ascended higher, curling along the slopes like a careful signature. When I finally reached the ranger station near the base of the range, a woman behind the desk handed me a packet labeled Station 5, Protocols. She didn't smile. She didn't congratulate me. She simply said, "Your mentor will meet you up there," as if she were talking about a place no one willingly visited. I sat in my car in the gravel lot for several minutes after that, staring up at the winding dirt road that led deeper into the forest. My phone had already lost service. The sky felt too large. The trees felt too close. Then I turned the key, pressed the gas, and let the last strands of my old life fall away behind me. Even now, I can point to that moment, the moment everything in my world shifted, almost imperceptibly, like the faint tremor before an earthquake. I didn't know it then, but Station 5 was waiting for me long before I ever knew to seek it out. And it already had rules. Rules I would soon learn were not suggestions. Rules I would learn the hard way. The dirt road to Station 5 wound upward in tight, deliberate turns, the kind that forced me to slow down and listen to the gravel crackle beneath my tires. Pines gathered thick on both sides, their trunks rising like pillars in a cathedral whose ceiling I could barely see. The higher I climbed, the quieter the world became. No humming traffic, no distant sirens, no human leftovers of any kind. Just the steady pulse of the forest, ancient and indifferent. I didn't realize how much noise I'd been dragging from my old life until I felt it peeling away, layer by layer, in the suffocating stillness. Station 5 appeared almost abruptly, perched on the ridge like a lone sentinel. It wasn't what I expected. Most fire lookouts I'd seen in pictures had a clean, almost quaint look to them, all fresh paint and postcard charm. But Station 5 looked older. Not dilapidated, but lived in. Weather-beaten. Its wooden supports were scarred with old burn marks, faint but unmistakable. The metal railing circling the deck carried the dusky orange tint of years spent in sun and storm. Still, it stood tall, solid, watching. A single truck sat parked beside the trail leading up to the tower. It was an older model, an F-150, maybe late 90s. Paint scratched, mirrors replaced more than once. Someone still used it regularly, someone who was waiting for me. I shut off the engine and stepped out. The air hit me like a cold slap. It was cleaner than any air I'd breathed in the city. Thin, sharp, edged with the resinous sweetness of pine. For a moment, I just stood there, inhaling like I'd been underwater for too long. "You're early." The voice came from the staircase leading up to the tower. A man leaned there, arms crossed over a faded green Forest Service jacket. He looked to be in his early 60s. His beard silver, his skin the weathered bronze of someone who'd spent more years outside than in. His expression was unreadable, not unkind, but not welcoming either. "I'm Anthony," I said, hoisting my duffel over my shoulder. "I know who you are." He jerked his head upward. "Come on, might as well see what you signed up for." I followed him up the steps. They creaked beneath our weight, but in a reassuring way, like a house settling, not breaking. The forest stretched endlessly around us like an ocean of treetops shifting gently in the wind. The view was staggering, but the man, my mentor presumably, climbed without looking. "What should I call you?" I asked. "Most folks call me Harlow." "Is that your first or last name?" "It's the one that matters up here." I didn't press further. At the top platform, Harlow pushed open the lookout's door. Inside, the room was simple but functional. A circular firefinder in the center, a narrow cot against the wall, a small kitchen unit, shelves lined with maps and handwritten ledgers and windows on all sides. The kind of place where every object had a purpose. "This'll be your post," he said. "You'll rotate shifts. I'll be around until you can handle it alone." When he looked at me, it felt like he was evaluating something deeper than my physical presence, something quieter. Maybe my resolve, maybe my fear. "You comfortable with solitude?" he asked. "I think so," I said. He snorted. "People always think so, as solitude's a different thing when it's miles deep, when the nearest living soul's 2 valleys away and that soul might not be awake when you need him." He turned to face the window overlooking the western ridge. "Up here, your thoughts get loud, sometimes too loud." The wind groaned along the siding, low and prolonged, like something exhaling. I swallowed. I just needed a change. "You'll get one." His tone was neither mocking nor reassuring, just factual. Station 5 has a way of changing people. He walked to the corner, rummaged through a metal lockbox, and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. When he handed it to me, his fingers brushed mine, cold and calloused. I unfolded it. A list of 12 rules stared back at me, handwritten in thick black marker. Some underlined, some circled, some smudged as if touched by damp fingers. Rule 1. After sundown, do not answer the radio on the first call. Rule 2. If you see lights in the tree line, close the shutters and wait. Rule 3. Never step outside between 2 and 3 a.m. Rule 4. If you hear footsteps on the stairs, ignore them. Rule 5. Do not wear the color red in the tower. Rule 6. If the forest goes silent, stay absolutely still. Rule 7. When writing in the logbook, leave the last page blank. Rule 8. Do not attempt to call Station 4 after midnight. Rule 9. If someone knocks and uses your name, it is not them. Rule 10. Keep the door locked at all times. Rule 11. Do not look at the ridge on foggy mornings. Rule 12. Follow all previous rules even if I tell you otherwise. I stared at them, almost laughing from the absurdity, but something in Harlow's posture stopped me. Is this a joke? I asked. No. His voice was flat. Final. Those rules are how you stay alive here. I looked at the list again. The shaky underlines, the uneven handwriting, the quiet implication. Alive from what? I asked. Harlow didn't answer at first. Instead, he moved to the window, looking out over the sweeping forest below. The trees shivered in unison as a gust of wind passed through. When the conditions are right, he finally said, the forest pays attention, and when it pays attention, you need to know how to behave. I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. Not even remotely. But I felt something then, a faint pressure in the air, a heaviness I couldn't name, something that made the hairs on my arms lift. Harlow turned back to me. You'll learn, he said, one way or another. Outside, the wind changed direction. The tower creaked, long and low, like a warning whispered through old wood, and that was my first moment in Station 5. The moment I realized the forest wasn't a backdrop. It was a presence. The first morning at Station 5 began with a kind of quiet. I didn't know how to absorb. Not the absence of sound. Silence isn't really silent out here, but a quiet with texture, depth, weight. The wind brushed through the pines in long, whispering sweeps. Somewhere far below, water trickled over stone. A hawk screeched once and then disappeared into the sky. No cars, no phones, no people. Just pure, undiluted wilderness pressing against all sides of the tower. Harlow watched me take it in with the faintest flicker of recognition, like he'd seen hundreds of people try to interpret this place for the first time and knew exactly what came next. Eat something, he said, nodding toward a row of metal cabinets. You're no good to the fire line on an empty stomach. I found oatmeal packets, canned fruit, and a bag of coffee that smelled like it had lived here longer than either of us. I brewed a cup anyway, and when I stepped out onto the deck, the steam curled into the cold morning air like a living thing. The forest stretched out in every direction, endless, layered, impossibly tall. It felt like standing at the edge of a world that didn't care whether I existed. Harlow joined me a moment later, leaning on the railing. Breathtaking, isn't it? He said. It is. Give it a few days, he muttered with a half smile. The awe fades, the quiet doesn't. He handed me a pair of binoculars and pointed to the horizon. Your first job, learn the landscape. Trace the ridges, memorize the drainage lines. Know where the sun sets and where it bleeds into the valleys. This place doesn't tolerate uncertainty. He talked me through the landmarks. Bearjaw Ridge to the north, Splitooth Valley stretching long and narrow to the west, the distant shimmer of a lake we'd never go near because the trail washed out a decade ago and no one bothered to fix it. The names were strange, old, the kinds of names that felt inherited rather than chosen. Fire's not your biggest concern up here, he said. Fire has rules. We understand fire. There was an unspoken second half to that sentence. I didn't ask him to finish it. By midday, we fell into a rhythm. Harlow took me through the equipment. The Osborne Firefinder, the radios, the compass, the weather instruments mounted outside. It all made sense. These were the reasons the tower existed. These were the tools I expected to learn. But every time I asked about one of the 12 rules, he redirected my attention like a shepherd steering a sheep away from a cliff. You'll understand when it matters, he kept saying. By late afternoon, the sky shifted, turning the forest gold. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Most towers had modern reinforcements, but Station 5 had its own stubborn architecture. Dense wooden beams, metal bolts that looked hand-forged, an interior layout that hadn't been updated since the 70s. "Why does it feel older than the others?" I finally asked. Harlow shrugged. "Some places just are." We ate dinner early. Rice, canned chili, 2 lukewarm beers he pulled out of a cooler I'd swear wasn't plugged into anything. He didn't talk much. When he did, it was practical, short, stripped of anything unnecessary. I realized he wasn't being cold. He was conserving something. Words, energy, maybe himself. When the sun touched the ridgeline, a chill slipped through the lookout like a warning. "Sundown," Harlow said. "Station work ends. The rules begin." He pointed to the paper I'd folded into my back pocket. "Rule 1, after sundown, do not answer the radio on the first call." "Why?" I asked. He looked at me, eyes steady. No softness. "Because the first call isn't for you." I didn't understand. Again, he didn't elaborate. As dusk pulled its heavy curtain over the forest, something in the atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically. No cinematic thunder. No flashing lights. Just a subtle tightening, like the woods were inhaling and forgetting to exhale. Harlow lit a single lantern and turned off the overhead bulb. "You'll want to avoid bright lights at night. They see better when we shine too much." I opened my mouth to ask who they were, but the words dried up when I saw his expression. It wasn't fear. It was respect, the kind a person develops after far too many nights alone. "Get some rest," he said, lowering the shutters halfway. "Your shift starts at dawn, my turn to stay awake." "You don't sleep at night?" He shook his head. "Station 5 doesn't sleep at night, not really." I lay on the narrow cot, the tower groaning softly in the wind. The lantern cast warm, flickering shadows that danced across the ceiling. I tried to focus on my breathing, on the novelty of being so far removed from everything I'd ever known. But sleep didn't come easily, because beneath the natural sounds there was something else. A faint tapping rhythm on the outer wall, too steady to be branches, too light to be an animal. I sat up, pulse quickening. "Harlow?" I whispered. He didn't turn. He was sitting at the firefinder, staring out into the dark through a sliver of uncovered window. "Don't worry about it," he said quietly. "It won't come inside." "What is it?" A reminder. Of what? That this place was here before us. The tapping stopped. The forest exhaled again, long and deep. The quiet thickened until I felt it pressing against my spine. At some point, exhaustion won. I drifted into a fragile sleep filled with impressions rather than dreams. Shadows stretching across the treetops, a hum rising from the ground, a shape standing at the far edge of the clearing, too tall to be human. When I woke to the first sliver of dawn, the tapping was gone. But Harlow was still awake, sitting exactly where I'd left him, eyes fixed on the forest below. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. I hesitated. "Think so." He nodded once. "Good. Station 5 usually introduces itself on the first night." A shiver crawled through me. Not fear, not yet, but the creeping awareness of something vast and ancient just beyond understanding. "Welcome to your new life," Harlow said. And behind his words was the unmistakable truth. This place was already watching me back. My second morning at Station 5 should have felt easier, familiar even. The light was the same soft amber spill across the wooden floorboards. The air had the same cold bite purity that sharpened every inhale. The view, the endless quilt of pines stitched over the mountains, was still astonishing. Nothing looked different, but something was. Harlow sat by the firefinder with that rigid posture of his, the kind a person holds after spending the whole night listening for something. He wasn't reading, wasn't writing, wasn't even pretending to relax. He simply stared outward, jaw tight, eyes hooded, hands folded like he was praying or waiting or both. "You didn't sleep," I said. "I won't sleep tonight either." I waited for an explanation that didn't come. Instead, he rose slowly, the stiffness in his joints cracking through the silence. "Come on," he said. "Time to learn your morning sweep." I followed him across the deck, binoculars in hand. The valley lay washed in soft gold, tranquil, peaceful, almost innocent. The shadows between the trees were blue and cold. The sky above was a pale, perfect blue. But the forest carried a faint residue from the night before, something that pressed against the senses like a memory you can't fully erase. A tension, a hush. What exactly was that tapping? I finally asked. Harlow scanned the tree line through his binoculars. Just the woods reminding you they're not empty. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you'll get this early on. His voice was low, quiet, but not unkind. You're still learning which questions matter. He guided me through the routine. Hourly checks, weather readings, fire danger logs. The practical pieces grounded me, made me feel capable, almost safe. But each time the wind gusted through the pines or a crow called from somewhere unseen, I felt the prickle of something watching. By noon, we took a break, eating sandwiches on the deck. Harlow was unusually talkative, telling me about storms he'd watched roll in over the ridge, fires that died out on their own like something had smothered them, odd shapes he'd seen through fog so thick it swallowed sound. He spoke in facts, no embellishments, no theatrics, just the plain, unsettling truth of a man who had seen too much. Then, as the sunlight sharpened into early afternoon, the event that altered everything happened. The radio crackled. At first it was just static, familiar, harmless, the white noise of the wilderness. But then a voice bled through, distant, muffled, half swallowed by interference. Fee, Station 5, copy. The first call of the day, I froze, instinctively reaching for the receiver. Harlow's hand shot out, firm, stopping mine. Rule 1, he said sharply, you do not answer the first call. But what if it's important? I asked. It isn't. How do you know? He looked at me with something like pity. Because no one tries to reach us at this hour, and because the forest hasn't finished waking up. The radio crackled again, louder this time, clearer, as if the voice had moved closer. Station 5, operator, copy, please. Please, human sounding, urgent, too urgent. I should answer, I said, pulse quickening. Someone could be in trouble, lost hikers. Don't. His voice hardened, gaining an edge I hadn't heard before. That isn't someone. Not yet. I stared at him, unsettled. What do you mean, not yet? You wait. You always wait. We stood there, the radio spitting static at our feet. Every instinct in me screamed to pick it up, to respond, to help, to do something. Isn't that why we were here? Isn't that the job? Then the voice came a third time, and this time it spoke my name. Anthony. My blood turned to ice. Harlow went pale. His hand tightened around the receiver. That's impossible, I said. No one here knows me. Not my last name, not my first. The radio clicked off abruptly. Silence stretched across the tower like a drawn wire. Harlow set the receiver down with deliberate calm. You didn't tell anyone else you were coming here, did you? No. You didn't mention Station 5 in town? No. You didn't tell friends or family? I don't. I swallowed. I don't really have anyone to tell. Harlow studied me closely, searching for some hint of uncertainty. When he found none, he exhaled slowly, heavily, like he'd been hoping for a different answer. Then it learned your name quickly. What learned my name? I asked. Harlow didn't reply. Instead, he walked over to the logbook, flipped it open to a fresh page, and wrote a single line. Day 2. First call mimicked personal details. Response withheld. Tower intact. He closed the book. Good work, he said. I didn't do anything. You obeyed the rule. He glanced toward the tree line where sunlight fractured through the branches in uneasy patterns. Most rookies don't. Something in his tone, some quiet grief, told me he wasn't speaking theoretically. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strained quiet. I tried to focus on my training, on memorizing landmarks, on tracing ridge lines and drainage paths. But my mind kept circling the radio call, the way the voice had clipped my name like it had known it forever. As dusk approached, the familiar tension returned. The woods dimmed faster than they should have. The wind changed direction twice. Birds abandoned the nearest trees. Harlow locked the shutters without being asked. You'll take first sleep tonight, he said. I'll watch. Because of the voice? Because of everything. I lay awake longer than I intended, staring at the sliver of lantern light flickering across the ceiling. Every sound felt magnified. The groan of the tower beams, the rustle of branches, the far-off howl of wind scraping over stone, and then a whisper. Faint, so faint I nearly dismissed it as part of a dream. It came from just outside the window. Anthony. My breathing stopped. Not shouted, not mimicked through static. Spoken, soft, human. Inches from where I lay. I sat up slowly, my skin prickled. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Harlow, I whispered. He was already awake. He didn't move from his chair, didn't look at me, didn't look toward the window. He only spoke 2 words. Rule 10. Keep the door locked at all times, meaning whatever was outside was close enough to try the handle. I stared at the doorknob, watched it twitch just slightly, just once. Then it went still. The forest inhaled, the tower exhaled. Harlow didn't turn until several long minutes passed. It knows you now, he said. Quiet. Final. Tomorrow, he added, you'll learn why Station 5 has rules in the first place. I didn't sleep again that night. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, although that was certainly part of it. This exhaustion felt older, heavier, as if something had been gnawing at the edges of my rest, chewing through thoughts, thinning them into threads. Harlow stood by the stove, heating water in the dented metal kettle. Outside, the world was awash of silver-blue dawn and fog thick enough to mute the nearest ridge. The pines appeared as silhouettes, tall, black strokes against a curtain of shifting gray. It was beautiful. It was suffocating. Fog's early, I said. It isn't fog, Harlow replied. He didn't explain further. The kettle whistled sharply, too loud in the quiet. He poured instant coffee into a chipped mug and handed it to me. The gesture felt fatherly, almost gentle, but the lines in his face were pulled taut from the night. The lantern still burned beside his chair. You didn't sleep at all, I said. I'll catch a few hours before noon. I doubted that. Harlow moved differently this morning, careful, overly measured, like a man trying not to disturb something delicate, invisible, crouched between every breath. Last night, I said slowly, you knew it was out there, but you didn't try to scare it away. Or deal with it. Deal with it? He sniffed a dry laugh. You don't deal with the forest. You listen. You follow the rules. You hope that's enough. The words settled coldly in my chest. He gestured toward the corner desk, the one I'd seen him at so many times. Before we check the ridge, you need to see something. Sit. I obeyed. He pulled open the bottom drawer and removed a green logbook. But unlike the official fire journals, this one was battered and water-stained. The leather binding had teeth marks, actual teeth marks embedded along the edge. Something had bitten the book hard enough to cut grooves through the hide. Harlow dropped it in front of me, open to the back. I flipped through pages filled with scrawled handwriting, some his, some clearly not. The entries stretched back years, maybe decades, but my fingers stilled when I reached the final section. Names, a list of them, 2 columns, neatly lettered, no explanations, just names. Evelyn Payne, Marcus Hines, Travis Loam, Rachel Denton, Leonard Cross, Felix Harlow, Evan Durney, Hannah. I stopped, looked at Harlow. Your name is here. I worked my first season with a partner, he said. Evan. He didn't follow Rule 1. My stomach tightened. What happened to him? The forest answered. He didn't blink when he said it. Didn't flinch, didn't even lower his voice. That terrified me more than anything else he could have described. I studied the list again. Most names were crossed out in black ink. No pattern, no dates, just a single line slashed through each. Only 3 remained uncrossed. Felix Harlow, Hannah Rook, Anthony Vale, my name freshly written. I touched the ink with my thumb. It smudged a little, still soft. You added me, I said. Yes. What does this list mean? It means you're no longer a stranger to this place. Once it learns your name, you're part of the ledger. I scanned the crossed out names again. Are those deaths? No. His jaw flexed. Not exactly. Then what happened to them? Harlow exhaled slowly, heavily. Some never returned from their night shifts. Some walked into the woods despite the rules. Some answered the wrong call. And the crossed out names? They're the ones the forest took whole, and the ones not crossed out? He met my eyes. The ones it's still deciding. My throat went tight. What does that mean for us? It means we follow the rules, or we join the rest. A gust of wind struck the tower hard. The shutters rattled. The entire structure creaked under the sudden pressure. I turned toward the window. The fog churned strangely, rolling uphill instead of down, clinging to the trees like something with intent. "What is that?" I whispered. Harlow didn't look. The reason for Rule 7. Rule 7 is, do not watch the fog move. Yes, but why? Because sometimes it watches back. A chill spiraled down my spine. He closed the logbook and shoved it back into the drawer. "We'll talk more tonight," he said. "This morning you need routine. Routine keeps your head straight." We stepped onto the deck for the first sweep. Visibility was terrible, 30 yards at best. Moisture beaded on my eyelashes. The air smelled wrong. Not rotting, not burned, just wrong. Like two incompatible scents forced into the same breath, pine and something metallic. Harlow handed me the binoculars. "Listen to the forest. Don't try to see too much." That advice made no sense until I raised the binoculars. Through the lenses, the fog appeared thicker, heavier, and shapes, dark, elongated shapes, moved within it. Tall, slender, swaying in ways that didn't match the wind. I lowered the binoculars. The shapes vanished. I raised them again. They reappeared, in different positions. "Harlow," I whispered, heartbeat hammering. "What are those?" "The reason only Station 5 has rules. Keep scanning." "But, keep scanning," he repeated, firm. I obeyed, but my hands trembled. The shapes drifted through the fog like shadows searching for an anchor. One of them paused, tilted, faced the tower. I froze. It wasn't looking, it was listening. "Harlow," I said, barely breathing. "It hears us. Then don't give it anything else to hear." For the next 10 minutes, we stood silent, motionless, while the shapes slid deeper into the fog and vanished. When they were gone, Harlow rested a hand on the railing. "Today," he said, "you'll learn Rule 3. "Rule 3, I repeated. "Do not acknowledge anything that knows your name." "Yes." "How do I know if it knows my name?" "You'll know," he said, "the same way you knew last night." I swallowed hard. "And if I break the rule?" "You won't," he said, "because you're still on the list." His gaze drifted toward the fog-choked valley, "and because it's still watching." By sunrise, I had begun to doubt my own memory. Sleep deprivation does strange things to the mind, and isolation does worse. By the time the first pale light spilled across the forest canopy, I found myself squinting down at the ladder, half expecting to see footprints burned into the metal or claw marks carved into the rungs. There was nothing. The ground below was undisturbed, no broken branches, no footprints, not even the faintest suggestion that something tall and bent had wandered through during the night. If not for the tight ache in my chest, or the radio's lingering static hiss, I could have convinced myself it was only fear wearing a mask. I climbed down slowly, my arms shaky from holding tension for hours. The entire forest felt washed clean by morning light. But beneath the bright calm, there was a rawness, like a wound dressed but still bleeding underneath. When I reached the bottom, I turned in a full circle. The air was crisp, the sky unblemished. Birds chattered from the pines as if nothing unnatural had ever happened in these woods. But I remembered the journal entry. The trees bent away from it. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest remembered something I didn't yet understand. Eric didn't arrive that morning. He didn't radio in. The schedule he'd written for me said he would check in sometime after dawn. But noon came and went with only silence and the wind shifting through the needles. I tried to keep my thoughts organized by focusing on the list of morning tasks: cleaning the watch room, logging overnight conditions, checking the fuel levels for the generator. All simple chores. Chores I had looked forward to for the sake of structure. But my hands shook when I poured water into the enamel kettle, and I nearly dropped the temperature gauge while trying to record humidity. The woods had a rhythm, a tempo. Last night had broken it. By mid-afternoon, I'd replayed the moment the figure stopped at the window so many times that the image no longer felt like something I had seen, but something I had been shown, as if the forest itself had pressed its face against the glass. To reassure myself, I decided to check the perimeter. A rational person would want proof. Footprints, disturbed soil, broken foliage, anything physical. I walked the base of the tower in slow, careful arcs. That was when I noticed something new. A small pile of stones, perfectly stacked. 5 stones in ascending size, forming a tiny, deliberate spire. Someone had placed it about 6 feet from the first ladder rung. I crouched down. The stones were smooth river pebbles, not the rough granite common to the forest floor, and they were arranged with unnatural symmetry. Something had made this. I reached out with one finger and nudged the top stone. It rolled cleanly off and hit the ground with a soft tap. Seconds later, my radio crackled like a wasp in a jar. Station 5. The voice was strained, dry, faint. Not Eric. Station 5, do not touch the markers. My breath stopped. I held the radio away from my mouth, my palms slicked with sweat. Repeat, do not touch the markers. Leave them as found. Do not disturb. If you have, return the last one to its original position. A long hiss of static filled the edge of the channel. I swallowed hard and placed the stone back on top of the stack. My fingers trembled as I adjusted it until it stood upright again. Silence. Then the voice returned, softer. Good. I pressed the button. Who is this? Where's Eric? Static swallowed the reply. Then, Eric is safe, but you need to follow the rules, all of them. I don't understand, I whispered. What are these markers? The voice did not answer for a long moment. Then, they're not for you, they're for them. A chill crawled over my skin. Who? The static became a shrill, rising hum, and then the transmission cut out altogether like someone had yanked the cord from the device. I stared at the radio for a long time, waiting for the voice to return. It didn't. Instead, the woods around me shifted. Not physically, but acoustically. The distant bird calls quieted, the breeze stilled. A distant echo, like a long, hollow call, rolled low through the ravine. Not human, not animal, too resonant. I stepped backward until my hand hit the metal ladder. Whitish light flickered between the trees, not bright, not like flashlights, more like faint bioluminescent glows weaving through the trunks at uneven heights. My throat tightened with dread. Rule 6. If you see lights between the trees, dim everything and stay still until they pass. I didn't have a lantern out here, and the afternoon light wasn't easy to dim, but I knew instinctively that movement would draw their attention. So I stood perfectly still, breath shallow. The lights drifted in a slow arc through the lower forest. They pulsed like slow heartbeats. Sometimes a cluster moved together. Other times a lone one drifted closer, then retreated as if patrolling. Minutes passed, maybe longer. The lights eventually faded into the distance, dissolving between the pines like dissolving flecks of frost. Only after they were completely gone did the ambient forest noise return. I didn't realize I'd been clenching the radio so tightly until my knuckles ached. I climbed the ladder in a hurry, almost slipping twice. When I reached the watch room, I locked the trapdoor shut, a useless gesture, but made my nerves settle by a degree. I wanted answers. I needed them. But the forest sent its own reply instead. At exactly 5:22 in the evening, the radio lit up again with a brief single word spoken in a trembling whisper. They know you touched it. The transmission died. I sank into the chair, heart pounding, staring out into the stretching wilderness. Something in these woods was watching me, judging my movements, testing the edges of the rules I barely understood. And somewhere out there, Eric was either deliberately avoiding me or trying to keep something away from me. Either way, night was coming. And for the first time since I accepted this job, I wasn't sure if I'd chosen isolation or walked directly into a place that had been waiting for me. The hours before sunset passed like a tightening snare. Every time the wind shifted, I thought I heard footsteps. Every time the boards creaked under my boots, I startled hard enough to feel my ribs strain. I tried to drown myself in routine, cleaning the lantern glass, restacking the supply crates in the corner, rechecking the fire finder. But there was no routine steady enough to silence the memory of that whisper. They know you touched it. As the day bled into evening, the sky dimmed to a bruised purple. Thin clouds dragged themselves across the horizon. The entire forest seemed to exhale in a long, low groan as the temperature dropped. I stood at the eastern window, watching the ridgeline across from Station 5. It was a dark slope of pine and fir, jagged with rock outcrops and narrow gullies. Eric had mentioned the ridge earlier, referring to it casually as Thomason's Spine, a natural fire break and one of the park's oldest geological features. Nothing about it seemed remarkable during the day, but now, with the last of the sun bleeding out behind it, the ridge felt ancient, more like a massive creature lying motionless beneath a blanket of trees than a simple landform. Its silhouette stretched like a spine indeed, crooked, uneven, and bristling. A shadow moved across the top. I leaned forward, breath held. At first, I thought it was just a tree swaying in the wind, but the shape grew clearer as the sky dimmed behind it, the outline of a man. Tall, rigid, standing right at the edge of the ridge's highest point. He faced my direction. My pulse stuttered. No light touched his features, just a stark, human-like frame cut out against the dying sky, though something about his proportions felt not quite right. Shoulders too narrow, arms too long, a posture too still. There was no trail up there, no reason for anyone to stand in that exact spot. I raised the binoculars with trembling hands. The glass swayed for a second before I steadied it on the ridgeline. The breathing stopped in my chest. The figure stood perfectly upright, but its head was tilted, not in curiosity, but at an angle too sharp to be natural, as though its neck were bending under the wrong joint. And the longer I stared, the more the silhouette seemed wrong. The limbs were slender, almost stick-like, the torso too short for the arms. It resembled a human being only in the same way a scarecrow resembles a farmer, a mockery of shape, a suggestion of something mimicking us. Then, it raised an arm, slowly, violently slowly. The hand, or what should have been the hand, unfurled like branches snapping into place. It pointed toward me. A cold current surged down my spine. The binoculars slipped in my grip, but I caught them before they fell. As I lowered them to the desk, the radio crackled. For a moment, just static, but the static felt purposeful, as if someone was breathing too close to the microphone. Then, inside, before the light goes. Not Eric's voice. The same whisper as earlier. Thin, strained, like someone speaking through a throat packed with dust. I reached for the radio, but my hand stopped short. Something in the voice made me freeze. It wasn't just warning me, it was urging, begging. As if it feared what came after sunset as much as I did. The sky darkened further. The figure on the ridge melted into the encroaching black, its outline absorbed until the ridge stood empty again. I stepped away from the window and lit the lantern. Its warm glow pushed the shadows back by inches. Night settled around the tower like a living cloak. I tried the radio again. Eric, if you're there, please respond. Only static. I paced the watchroom, checking each window twice. I didn't know what the rules meant anymore. The laminated sheet listed 10 rules. I'd only been introduced to 6 so far. I hated how the paper trembled in my hands. Rule 1. Always acknowledge a radio call, but only if the voice belongs to someone you know for certain is alive. Rule 2. Never descend the tower after dusk, no matter what you hear. I underlined the second part in my head. No matter what you hear. A crack echoed below me. I spun toward the trapdoor, heart ramming my ribs. Another sound followed, metal striking metal, but off rhythm. Not footsteps, not climbing, more like something scraping the side of the tower. Slow, testing. I backed away slowly, hand covering my mouth as if my breath might give me away. The lantern flickered. The air temperature dropped so fast the glass fogged. Something shifted just beyond the window. I forced myself to look. At first, nothing. Just the black between the pines and the faint motion of branches bending in the wind. Then, there. 2 faint points of light, low to the ground where no eyes should be. They hovered, blinking out of sync with each other, drifting in a slow arc. Not eyes, not fireflies. Something else entirely. I killed the lantern. The room sank into darkness. The points of light drifted past the tower base, vanishing behind a cluster of trees. The scratching sound faded. For several minutes, I didn't breathe. When the normal forest noises resumed, the croak of frogs, the distant rustle of wind, I let my muscles loosen just enough to sit on the edge of the cot. My pulse throbbed in the wounds left by fear. That was when the radio clicked on again. Not static, not a whisper. A voice I recognized. "Hey kid, you up there still?" Eric. I lunged for the receiver, relief washing over me like heat. "Eric, thank God. Are you close? Something's been... Open the door?" "I'm at the ladder." My breath evaporated. I stared down at the radio, fingers frozen around the receiver. "Eric," I whispered, "say the rule." A pause. Too long of a pause. "What rule?" My stomach nodded. "Rule 1, I said quietly. "If you're really you, say Rule 1. Another silence, then the voice spoke, perfectly calm, perfectly steady. "Come on down, it's safe now." Cold. Mechanical. Empty. Not Eric. I let go of the radio as if it had burned me. The device crackled again, softly this time, and then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound I had dreaded most. The first step on the ladder. Metal creaked, then another step, slow, deliberate, counting upward. They had found me. Night had only just begun. The metal ladder groaned under each step, carrying the unmistakable weight of something ascending toward me. Not a scramble, not an animalistic rush. A deliberate climb, measured, patient, as though whatever was below had all the time in the world, and knew I didn't. I backed away from the trapdoor until my spine touched the far wall of the watchroom. My breath came out in short, stuttered pulls, fogging the cold air. The lantern stayed dark. I didn't dare turn it on. I pressed myself into the shadows, listening to the steady, unnatural rhythm. Step. Pause. Step. The kind of cadence you hear when someone mimics walking rather than naturally doing it. The radio crackled again. "Don't hide," Eric's voice said, tinged with an odd, static-laced warmth. "You're safe with me." My lungs tightened. The voice was uncanny, just real enough to trigger instinctive trust, just wrong enough to freeze every muscle. It wasn't the wrongness of pitch or tone, it was the wrongness of timing. Speech delivered with no breath behind it, words too evenly spaced, too consistent, like someone had studied human conversation but didn't understand the imperfections. Step, another step. Nearer. I shut my eyes, desperate to recall the rules. Rule 3. If you hear footsteps on the stairs after midnight, do not check. It wasn't midnight yet, but the rules were obviously incomplete, and the woods were clearly willing to bend their own schedule. Rule 1. Only acknowledge a radio call if the voice belongs to someone you know for certain is alive. That voice might have been wearing Eric's shape, but it wasn't him. I would have bet my life on it, and in this moment, I suspected that's exactly what was at stake. The ladder creaked again. My heartbeat thudded so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I crouched, inching toward the cot, slipping beneath it as quietly as possible. Dust and pine needles from someone's decades-old pack brushed my face. I flattened myself against the cold wood floorboards. The trapdoor latch jiggled, a metallic click, slowly, as though fingers, or something acting like fingers, were tracing the mechanism, learning how to open it by touch alone. "Come on now," the false voice coaxed. "You don't have to be afraid. I told you I'd check on you. Let's take a look." Another click. Not loud, but intentional. I pressed my palm against my mouth, biting down on the heel of my hand to keep any sound from escaping. Silence followed. Then the scraping of the metal latch, not opening, just testing. Slowly, the pressure eased. Something shifted, something listened. The woods outside fell eerily still, as if every living creature held its breath alongside me. The trapdoor never opened, but I swear something pressed against it from below. A gentle, deliberate push. The kind that wasn't meant to open the door, but to feel the weight of it, to measure the strength of the barrier between us. A hum rose beneath the floorboards, low, resonant, vibrating the wooden frame. The tower felt like a tuning fork struck by an invisible hand. And then, a whisper, but not through the radio, not through the wood. Inside my head, soft, blended like multiple tones woven together. "We see you." I clamped my eyes shut harder, praying this was fear-induced hallucination. The whisper deepened, harmonizing with the hum radiating up the tower's spine. "We heard you. Touch. The mark." My heart nearly stopped. The stone pile. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The whisper stretched thin and quiet like it was drifting away. "Watching. You." Then all at once, silence. No hum, no whisper, no scraping, nothing. The forest sounds returned gradually, an owl in the distance, the faint murmur of wind threading through the pines. The sudden normalcy was jarring, like waking mid-nightmare and not knowing if you're still dreaming. I stayed under the cot long after my legs began to cramp. When I finally crawled out, the room felt colder, as if some presence had siphoned off the last warmth before retreating. The radio clicked on. Just static at first. Then a sharp, pained gasp. "Station 5, are you there? This is Eric." My blood ran cold. This time, it was him. I snatched the receiver so fast it clattered against the desk. "I'm here," I whispered, my voice thin, shredded by fear. "Where the hell have you been? Someone was at the tower." A strained exhale came through. "I know." My spine stiffened. "You knew?" "I was trying to get to you before dark, didn't make it." "You heard it then?" My throat went dry. "Yes." A pause. Longer than I liked. "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to do exactly what I say." His voice had regained its usual composure, but now there was something else underneath it. Fatigue, sharp-edged panic, and a guilt he couldn't mask. I swallowed. "Okay. First," he said, steady and deliberate, "do not open that trapdoor tonight, not for any reason." I wasn't planning on it. "You'd be surprised what they'll do to make you try." My skin prickled. "Eric, what are they?" He didn't answer at first. Instead, he exhaled the kind of breath a man releases when bracing for something painful. "They're older than the park," he said finally. "Older than the forest. They don't follow human logic. They don't think like we do. The rules are the only language they understand." My grip tightened on the radio. "Then I broke one." "Yes," he said quietly, "and that means they're focused on you now. They don't forget. They don't lose interest, but you can still redirect their attention." "How?" His silence stretched long enough for dread to pool inside my stomach. "By surviving tonight." The line cracked, hissed, and died. I tried to call him back. No response. The tower groaned under a rising gust of cold wind, shivering through its old bones. Night deepened outside, filling the windows with a heavy, suffocating black. I walked to the far window. Down below at the tree line, faint pinpricks of pale light began to appear, drifting, wandering, multiplying. Not fireflies, not lanterns. Watching, searching. A presence, several presences, moved in the dark, circling the tower in slow, spiraling arcs. The rules suddenly felt less like superstitions and more like a prison code. Survival, a matter of obedience. And as the first lights approached the base of Station 5, something else echoed through the room. A thin, distorted echo of Eric's voice. "Let me in." Just 2 words, repeated. Too perfectly, too evenly. Wrong in every way that mattered. And night had found me again. And this time it wasn't testing the tower, it was testing me. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, though the thin beam suddenly felt useless, like a plastic toy against something that understood the dark far better than I ever could. The open door of cell E17 seemed to breathe, pulling in the stale air of the hallway and exhaling something colder, something older. The concrete beneath my boots vibrated faintly as if the building was reacting or warning me. Every instinct told me to obey Rule 8 and walk away, but something else kept my feet rooted to the floor. Curiosity. Defiance. Maybe stupidity, or maybe the unsettling sense that whatever waited inside E17 already knew I was here, already marked me the moment I heard that whisper. And turning my back on it now would only invite it closer. So I did the one thing they tell you never to do in this place. I leaned forward, just enough for the flashlight beam to skim the inside of the cell. What I saw at first was nothing unusual. Rusted bars, peeling paint, the cracked slab of a bed bolted to the wall. But as I adjusted my angle, the beam caught something else. A handprint, high on the wall. Small. Too small to belong to any inmate ever housed here. The print looked smeared, as though someone had pressed their palm against the concrete and dragged downward. Dust gathered around its edges, but the center was clean, as if it had been made recently. As if something had touched that wall tonight. A soft breath escaped my lips. Not fear, not exactly, but a recognition that E17 was not abandoned the way the prison keeps insisting. Behind me, a door slammed somewhere deep in the block. Not loud, but intentional. The sound snapped through my nerves like an electric jolt. Okay, I whispered to myself. Enough. I stepped back from the cell, slow and controlled, forcing my heartbeat to match my training. Never show fear. Never make sudden movements. The prison reacts to that. But before I could turn away completely, the whisper came again. Closer this time. Direct, like it pressed itself against the inside of my ear. Don't go. My vision blurred for half a second, a jolt of adrenaline that made the edges of the hallway tilt. I spun toward the source, flashlight raised. Nothing. Just the open cell yawning at me like a throat. But the words lingered in the air, shaping themselves around me, sinking into the concrete like the building itself had spoken. I took a long, steady breath and turned away, forcing my legs to move. One step, another. Each footfall felt heavier, as if the floor was trying to hold me in place. Halfway down the hall, every light overhead flickered at once, not 3 times, not even close. They flickered continuously, stuttering, spasming, frantic, as if something massive had just stepped into the electrical current of the entire wing. I didn't run, but for the first time tonight, I came very, very close. The corridor behind me groaned, metal strained. Something shifted in the dark, and then I heard it. Footsteps, soft, bare, following mine. I didn't sleep when my shift ended. I don't think anyone truly sleeps in this prison. At least, not the ones who know what the rules are really protecting us from. I lay awake long after the sun rose, staring at the ceiling of the staff barracks, as if expecting it to peel back and reveal what had followed me out of E-Block. It didn't, of course. Whatever walks those corridors after midnight stays within them. But its presence clung to me like humidity, invisible, oppressive, and impossible to shake. By noon, I was back on my feet, summoned unexpectedly by Warden Hale. The warden wasn't a man. He was a monolith carved into the shape of a man. Broad-shouldered, stiff posture, skin weathered as if he'd lived a dozen lives in harsh light. His office always smelled faintly of old books and disinfectant. No photos, no personal touches, as if he expected, at any moment, to simply vanish from this place and didn't want to leave behind proof he'd ever been here. He didn't greet me, just gestured to a metal folding chair. Sit. I obeyed. My legs were still sore from roaming E-Block the night before, but it was the kind of soreness that reminded me I had survived something that wanted that outcome to be different. Hale folded his hands on the desk. His knuckles were scraped raw. How was your shift? I hesitated. Not because I was unsure, but because I wasn't sure how much he already knew. Uneventful until I reached the upper wing of E-Block. I think someone or something was moving around. Hale didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Describe. His tone was clinical, the tone of someone logging a medical condition, not someone responding to a threat. I swallowed. Sounded like bare feet, light, measured, following me but keeping distance. I paused, then added quietly, somebody whispered. That made him look up. Not surprised, but disappointed. What did it say? He asked. The memory slid back in like a cold hand on my spine. Don't go, I said. For a moment, Hale said nothing. His silence was a weight pressing down on the room until the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder, struggling against it. Then he leaned forward. Rule 6, he said. Read it to me. I didn't need to. I'd memorized them all out of fear. If you hear someone speaking from an unoccupied cell, do not respond. Correct. His jaw tightened. Did you respond? No, I said quickly. I didn't speak. I didn't acknowledge it. Hale studied me long enough to make it clear he didn't entirely believe that, not because he thought I was lying, but because he knew the prison had ways of pulling reactions out of people they didn't realize they were giving. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. You're being reassigned tonight. My heartbeat skipped. To where? To the briefing room. I blinked. I didn't know we had a briefing room. You've walked past it many times, he said, but it only opens to those who've seen what you've seen. That didn't clarify anything. If anything, it made my stomach hollow out. Hale stood. I did too, and he motioned for me to follow him, and we walked through parts of the administrative wing I'd never entered. Every door looked the same. Heavy steel, small window, peeling paint. But Hale navigated them with the familiarity of a man who'd been walking this maze since before the plumbing was installed. We stopped at a door with no label, just a number etched directly into the metal. 0. The hall felt colder here. Hale pulled a key from his belt, longer than any standard prison key, made of a metal I didn't recognize, and slid it into the lock. The door opened with a sound that didn't match its weight. Not a clank. Not a groan. A slow inhale. Inside, the room was small, almost claustrophobic. 4 chairs, a table, a single lamp overhead that cast a cone of yellowish light onto a battered file folder placed dead center. 3 other people were already seated. Officer Morales, Senior Guard DuPont, and Sergeant Keene, the mentor I'd met on my first day and the only one who seemed to grasp how unprepared I really was. They all looked up, not at me, but at Hale. "Sit," he ordered. I took the last empty chair. Now Hale remained standing, his shadow stretching across all of us. "You're here because Station E-17 made contact last night." The room fell unbearably silent. Keene's jaw clenched. Morales' eyes closed for a second as if she were praying. DuPont's knuckles whitened around the arms of his chair. Hale continued, "This facility has boundaries, layers. Some of you have sensed them. A few have seen them. But E-17 is different. It is not an anomaly." He tapped the file folder with 2 fingers. "It's an intelligence." My breath caught. Not creature, not ghost, not inmate. Intelligence. Every few years, Hale said, it tests someone. It speaks to someone. And that person becomes important. He looked at me then. Directly. Heavy, like a verdict. "You need to understand something," he said softly, almost gently. "If it chose you, it will try again, and the next time it won't ask you not to go." He leaned closer. "It will ask you to come in." A draft swept through the room. Impossible, because there were no windows, no vents, no open doors. The lamp shuddered overhead, and from somewhere far down the hall, echoing faintly behind the steel walls, a voice whispered, not words, just one long, low exhale, like the prison was breathing, or someone inside it was waking up. I reported for duty that night with a feeling I can only describe as preemptive dread, the kind of heaviness that settles into the bones before the sky even goes dark. The prison seemed different when I crossed the threshold, not louder, not quieter, just aware, as if it had been expecting me. The guard rotation briefing was short, almost perfunctory. Sergeant Keene stood apart from the others, arms folded, eyes focused on something I couldn't see, some distant point where the walls converged and the rules bent. When the others dispersed, he motioned me over with a single finger. "You listen to me," he said quietly, "and you listen like your life depends on it. Because tonight, it does." My mouth felt dry. "It's E-17, isn't it?" "It's always E-17, he answered. "But this time it's going to try harder. It's been agitated since you heard it. Things like that. Don't give up." He paused. "They escalate. How do I stop it?" "You don't." He shifted, lowering his voice. "You endure it." A silence stretched between us, heavy as the walls. Keene took a breath. "Tonight is what we call a red shift." I frowned. "That's not on the schedule." "It wouldn't be," he said. "Red shifts are not official. They're not logged. They're not reported. They happen when the prison's atmospheric pressure changes." "Atmospheric? You'll feel it soon enough." He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm, grounding. "If something speaks to you," he said, "you walk. If it follows, you run. And if the lights go out..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I entered the East Wing just before midnight. The temperature dropped instantly. Not the normal kind of night chill, but a deep, almost subterranean cold that seeped into the skin through the seams of my uniform. I could see my breath fog in the beam of my flashlight. That had never happened inside the prison before. The lights above me flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. I almost turned back. But the hallway steadied, humming with the same low vibration I had begun to associate with E-Block. Something far beneath the concrete shifted, almost like a heartbeat that didn't belong to anything human. I started walking, My footsteps echoed in uneven patterns, sometimes too loud, sometimes too soft, as if the corridor couldn't decide how far away its own walls were. The geometry had that dreamlike instability again, where distance felt uncertain and corners looked sharper than they should. I passed cell E10, E12, E14. Each door was sealed, the small glass windows completely dark. When I reached E17, I knew before I looked. The door was open. Again, but this time it wasn't subtle. The door wasn't just ajar, it was fully swung out into the hall, like someone had pushed it with force. The hinges groaned, not from movement, but as if they'd been fighting against whatever opened it and lost. My pulse hammered. The cell was black, completely, unnaturally black. The beam of my flashlight didn't illuminate anything inside. It simply died at the threshold, like the darkness was solid. My throat tightened. "Keen," I whispered into the radio, "I've got a static, but not random, broken static. A pattern. Slow, deliberate, almost rhythmic." I turned down the volume and stepped back from the cell. The dark inside shifted, not light, not shape, but density, like a lung expanding. "Don't." The whisper came from behind me this time. I spun. Nothing. No footsteps, no breath. Just the echo of the word decaying along the corridor like ash scattered by a breeze. My hand trembled on the flashlight. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to steady my breathing, like when I saw something that made the cold inside me sharpen to a point. A figure. Far down the hall. Not close. Not approaching. Just standing where the hallway curved out of sight. It was a silhouette, tall, narrow, no features, no outline of clothing, just a presence occupying space where no one should be. The lights flickered overhead, and for one fractional second flash, I saw it clearly. It was facing me, and its head was tilted at an angle no human neck should make. My body reacted before my mind did. I stepped back. The figure remained still. Another flicker, another blink of freezing fluorescence. Now it was closer. Not much, maybe 5 feet, but enough to confirm it wasn't walking. It was repositioning. Like every blackout was a skipped frame. Each time the lights returned, it had advanced. The air pressure shifted behind me. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see that the cell door of E17 was no longer fully open. It was closing, slowly, as if something on the inside were pulling it shut. The figure at the end of the hall tilted its head farther, an impossible bend that made my stomach twist. And then I heard it. Footsteps, bare feet, fast, approaching. Not from the figure, from E17. I spun, and the cell door slammed against the frame with a force that shook dust from the ceiling. Whatever had been pulling it shut was still inside, and I had no intention of finding out what it was. I bolted down the hall. Behind me, the footsteps followed, light, frantic, eager. The corridor warped around me. The overhead lights died and surged, each blackout revealing the figure closer, closer, closer. At the edge of my vision, another shadow peeled itself from the doorway of E15. Then another from E13. Dozens of shapes, all silent, all wrong, all watching. The prison wasn't breathing anymore. It was awake. My lungs burned. The corridor felt endless. When I finally reached the end of the block, I slammed my hand against the emergency bar and burst into the main hall and crashed directly into Keen. His grip clamped onto my vest like a vice. "Don't look back," he whispered. I didn't, but I heard it. The footsteps, stopping exactly where the prison's old concrete met the reinforced modern flooring. The boundary. Keen pulled me through the stairwell door and kicked it shut behind us. He locked it with a shuddering exhale. Then he leaned forward, gripping my shoulders with both hands. "You made it," he said. "Barely. That was as close as anyone gets and still keeps their mind." I swallowed. "What was that?" He shook his head slowly. "That was the reason the rules exist," he said. "And tonight was only the first time it reached for you." Keen's eyes darkened. It will reach again. By dawn, the entire facility felt on edge. Quiet in the wrong ways. Loud in the wrong ways. Guards who normally joked during shift changes stood motionless, staring at corners, at vents, at door frames, as if waiting for something to crawl out. Keen didn't let me out of his sight. He walked beside me through the admin hall, guiding me with a hand between my shoulder blades. Not forceful, protective. "You're not going home," he said eventually. "Not after last night." I stopped walking. "What do you mean I can't stay here?" "You weren't chosen for your resume," Keen replied, "or your availability. E17 doesn't speak to everyone. It rarely speaks at all. And when it does," he paused, jaw tense, "it marks people. That was the beginning." We reached a door I had never noticed before, not because it was hidden, just because it looked like any other door in this place. Beige, chipped paint, metal frame, completely unremarkable. But Keen stopped in front of it with a heaviness I felt in my bones. The plaque on the door read, "Station 5 authorized personnel only." My breath caught. "I don't know what that is," I said. "You weren't supposed to," Keen replied. "Station 5 is older than this prison, older than the foundations. It was built over, buried, forgotten, but not gone." He unlocked the door with a brass key that looked handmade, like a relic from a century before the prison even existed. The lock clicked open with a sound like a sigh. He pushed the door. Cold air spilled out, thick with dust and something sweeter underneath, like old paper and burned cedar. A staircase descended into darkness. I felt myself lean back instinctively. "No," Keen looked at me with something like pity. "You don't have a choice anymore. You were called." I didn't answer, I said, voice tight. "You didn't have to." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the stairs. "Rules aren't just protection," he said. "They're boundaries. Last night, you crossed one." I didn't remember crossing anything, but the memory of the figure blinking closer with every flicker, the footsteps chasing from the cell, the whispers curling into the seams of the hall, something in me knew he was right. I swallowed hard. "What's down there?" "Perspective," Keen said. "Truth, and a duty older than this place, older than us." My pulse quickened. "Duty to what?" Keen didn't answer. Instead, he placed a flashlight into my hand. Not the standard issue plastic one. This one was metal, heavy, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. "Station 5 doesn't show itself unless it wants to," he said. "But it knows you now. It wants you." "Keen," I whispered. "I'm not ready." "No one is." He flicked on his own light and started down the stairs. For a long moment, I didn't move. The air drifting up from below felt alive. Not moving. Breathing. Slow. Ancient. Patient. The same pulse I had felt beneath E-Block, but deeper. Older. My legs finally obeyed. I followed him down. The stairs creaked despite being concrete, each step groaning like something old was shifting beneath our weight. The darkness swallowed the light faster than it should have. My flashlight beam stretched no farther than a few feet, as if the air itself was absorbing it. When we reached the bottom, Keen raised his light, and I saw it. Station 5 wasn't a room. It was a vast underground chamber carved directly into bedrock, walls raw and uneven, ceiling lost in shadows. The floor was etched with concentric circles, overlapping and intersecting in patterns that made my eyes ache if I looked too long. Symbols, hundreds of them, covered the stone. Not words, not language, but meaning. Deep, instinctive meaning. Like the shapes of things we fear before we learn their names. At the center of the chamber was a single chair, wooden, old, facing away from us. My skin tightened, prickling with cold. "Someone else is down here," I whispered. "No," Keen said quietly. "That's for you." The chair creaked, not much, just enough to shift, to acknowledge. My pulse hammered in my throat. "Sit," Keen said. My knees locked. "What happens if I do?" "If you don't," he answered, "what hunted you last night will no longer be bound to E-Block." My breath thinned. "It will follow me. It will follow all of us." I closed my eyes. Silence draped over the chamber like a heavy cloth. No machines, no vents, no distant radios, just the soft, rhythmic pulse in the stone, slow and immense. The heartbeat of something below us. Waiting. I stepped toward the chair. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to climb the stairs, to run until my lungs tore. But the symbols on the floor tugged at something buried deep in my mind, something primal and terrifyingly familiar. I sat. The wood was cold. Keen stepped back, not out of fear, out of reverence. And then, something behind the walls inhaled. The entire chamber expanded with it, the air thickening, the stone vibrating, dust swirling upward in a spiraling column that brushed my skin like a searching hand. A voice, not whisper, not sound, but resonance, filled my skull. You left the hollow world to find meaning. You found us, and now you will see. My heart stopped. Then, the rules protect your mind. Station 5 protects the world. You belong to it now. The chamber pulsed. The darkness leaned close, and for the first time I understood. This place wasn't broken. It was a seal, a boundary between what humans could survive knowing and what waited beneath that knowledge, and I had been chosen to guard it, or be consumed by it. The chair groaned under my weight as the presence enveloped me, ancient and vast, a tide of consciousness pressing against the thin walls of my mind. Somewhere far behind me, Keen spoke. Not loud, not urgent, just accepting. Welcome to Station 5. The chamber exhaled, the darkness opened, and the world above me, the world I once thought empty and meaningless, fell away completely.